Penguin Random House Audio presents The Fateful Lightning, a novel of the Civil War by Jeff Shaara. Read for you by Paul Michael. To the Listener. This is the fourth and final volume of a series that tells the story of the Civil War in the West. The first three, dealing with Shiloh, Vicksburg, and Chattanooga, featured a cast of characters that varied according to the significance of those men, and in one case woman, and their roles in the story. In all three books, the one consistent character is Federal General William T. Sherman. Here, Sherman becomes even more of a primary figure, as this story covers the campaigns from November 1864 through the end of the war in North Carolina in late April 1865. Much of the book covers what we know today as Sherman's March to the Sea, across North and Central Georgia. But there is much more to this story. In every book I've written, I agonize over just where the story should begin. Inevitably, the question arises from letters and emails I receive of why I did not include certain events or certain specific people. This book will be no exception. This is not a history book. I never make any attempt to include the entire history of any campaign or battle, or to include every major historical figure. That is the job of the historian. My primary objective is to find what I hope is the best story I can tell, and by doing so, to bring the history to life. This is a novel, but the characters are real. The accounts based on as many original source materials as I could find, including the work of a great many historians who have dug far more deeply into these characters than I can. In addition, I depend on those readers who offer up pieces of their own family history, often including diaries, collections of letters, or memoirs that have never been published and thus have never seen the light of day. The extraordinary value of all these resources creates the acknowledgments section of this book, found at the end. The choice to begin this story in November 1864 was a challenging one. My last book, the third volume in this series, The Smoke at Dawn, dealt with the Chattanooga campaign of late 1863. What happens immediately afterward, continuing through the summer of 1864, most notably the vicious struggles around the city of Atlanta, is a book all its own. Though I make frequent reference to that campaign, and to the campaigns that follow in central Tennessee, specifically the battles of Franklin and Nashville, this story begins with Sherman's march away from Atlanta, and features four principal voices and their experiences through the final 6 months of the war. To those who feel I have ignored or overlooked the significance of the events I have left out, I apologize. But I am restricted often by my publisher, who in this case was rather insistent that I not attempt to tackle 6 or 7 books on this particular part of the war, or write one gigantic book that would make Harry Potter pale in comparison. So I'm hoping you will accept this book as my attempt to bring you the final chapter of the war, a chapter that to many is virtually unknown, especially compared to the more familiar stories of Robert E. Lee and Ulysses Grant in Virginia. This story focuses on 4 primary points of view. One is Sherman, certainly. 2 others are his adversaries, General William Hardee and the young cavalryman Captain James Seeley, both of whom were introduced in the first volume, A Blaze of Glory, at Shiloh. Alongside these 3 soldiers comes a civilian, a very different kind of voice. He is a slave who discovers that, as Sherman's army makes its way through Georgia, the bullwhips and tracking hounds of his master have suddenly disappeared. Thus he joins an extraordinary parade, tens of thousands of men, women, and children who escape their bondage and follow along with Sherman's troops. I hope that the character of a man named Franklin offers you a perspective on this horrific time in our history that few have explored. Regardless of your feelings about General Sherman, and I've heard a great deal about that, I hope you will find this to be what I intended, an engaging and entertaining story about a part of the Civil War that is often overlooked. As always, the history is as accurate as I can make it, and the interpretation of the personalities of these characters, along with their day-to-day dialogue, is my own. This was a wonderful book to write. I hope you feel it is worth hearing. Jeff Shaara, April 2015. Part 1. I propose to demonstrate the vulnerability of the South and make its inhabitants feel that war and individual ruin are synonymous terms. William T. Sherman. He has done either one of the most brilliant or one of the most foolish things ever performed by a military leader. The date on which he goes and the plan on which he acts must really place him among the great generals or the very little ones. The British Army and Navy Gazette. Chapter 1. Sherman. Atlanta, Georgia, November 16, 1864. He halted the horse at the crest of a hill, pulled back on the reins, stared out westward for a long moment. The staff did the same, following his lead, spreading out to give him room, no one moving close unless he was told to. He heard the low murmurs, their reaction to what they were leaving behind them, the picture they would carry within them for the rest of their lives, the perfect portrait of absolute victory. Sherman held the horse as still as possible, the high-spirited animal moving nervously beneath him, seeming to know there was much more to be done. He clamped his legs in tight, calming the horse. His focus now on the scene. He didn't try to see detail, absorbed instead the vast panorama, the entire city offering itself as a marvelous showpiece. He wrapped his mind around that, what this meant, what it would mean to Grant, to the War Department, what it would mean to all those whose homes were boiling up in black smoke. Pieces of the enemy, he thought. No, it is more. It is the enemy itself, all of it, everything I can see, everything beneath the march of my army. The sun was rising behind him, but the city was lit from within, the spreading fires blowing through the fragility of the wooden structures, homes, businesses, factories. He had no urge to destroy the homes, had surprised his staff the night before when he pitched in trying to extinguish the flames on several small houses near his headquarters. Those fires were premature, without purpose, defiance of his orders that infuriated him. His hands were still smeared with soot, but he ignored that. The futility and anger now passed. Throughout the night the fires grew far beyond what a few men attempted to contain. Those men were outnumbered, swarmed over by a passion fueled by alcohol and a lustful revenge. The first fires had been set by vandals, miscreant soldiers more interested in a cruel game than in waging war. But the game became more ugly very quickly. A contagious disease spreading among men who knew that Sherman's order would eventually come, that in time he would have given them permission to set the fires anyway. As the night wore on, the torches were thrown by not only drunken soldiers, but even the sober, seduced by the raw power of the fires they could create. Those fires were indiscriminate, aimless, and Sherman was disgusted by that, had hoped instead to offer the rebels the message with clarity. The order had been given to his chief engineer Captain Orlando Poe.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?